The whole truth and nothing but the truth.
You are Terence Healy?
Yes, sir.
And where do you live?
46 Parkview Close, North Saint, Fulchester, sir.
And are you the plaintiff in this case?
Yes, sir.
Were you arrested by the police on the 15th of August, 1974?
Yes, sir.
And charged with?
The Great Fulchester Bank job.
Yes.
A civil action in which damages are claimed for malicious prosecution has just begun in Fulchester Crown Court. The claim arises out of a notorious raid in Fulchester in which 5 men wearing voodoo masks and carrying submachine guns snatched close on £2 million in cash as well as a number of safe deposit boxes. The man now giving evidence was one of the 4 men who were subsequently charged with the offence. The jury in this trial has been selected from members of the public, whose names appear on the electoral register and who are eligible for jury service.
And were you charged with the offence in November 1974?
Yes, sir. The jury disagreed.
So you were tried for a second time before a fresh jury?
Yes, sir. Same again.
So you were then brought before the Crown Court for a third time in March 1975?
Yes, sir.
Now, what happened there?
The old Bill decided to call it a day.
The prosecution offered no evidence against you and a verdict of not guilty was returned.
That's right.
Were you kept in custody all that time?
Yes, sir. Nearly 22 months in remand it was.
Now, that's virtually 2 years.
Yes, sir.
Who instigated your prosecution?
Commander Latcham.
That's the gentleman there. And you allege that in doing so, he acted maliciously, acting on information that he knew to be false.
False he knew could not flipping well be true, sir.
Information given by a professional criminal who had turned Queen's evidence.
Yeah, that's right. By the biggest lying grass of them all, Mr. Albert Jack Charlton.
Yes.
Is he here?
Well, perhaps my friend would elucidate.
My lord, it was decided that the interests of justice may best be served if the witness were to remain in protective custody, at least for the time being.
Yes, sir. Good idea, if you ask me.
Were there 3 others charged with you?
Yes, sir.
And were they convicted at the second of the trials that we've been talking about?
Yes, sir.
Now, at the present time, you are occupied as a second-hand car dealer.
Yes, sir.
And your average earnings are... what? £50 a week?
Yeah, something like that, sir. It's very slow right now.
There's not so much money about, is that right?
That's right, so things just not what they used to be.
Now, Mr. Healy, before you became a self-employed second-hand car dealer, what was your, avocation, your occupation, what job did you do?
Well, I was at it, wasn't I?
At what, Mr. Healy? It's no good talking to the jury in some kind of code.
I was a professional criminal, sir.
You were born, am I not right, in 1938 in the East End of London?
That's right, sir. Bethnal Green.
That's not the easiest of childhoods, which perhaps is not surprising considering the war years. Were you evacuated to Wales? Did you run away? Then did you go to several different sets of foster parents? Approved schools?
Yeah, industrial school it was at that time, sir.
Oh, yes, of course. It was before the 1948 Act. And you were 9 years old at the time?
That is right, sir.
Now, for what terrible crime were you sent to industrial school at the age of 9?
Stealing a tricycle, sir.
Stealing a tricycle?
Yes, sir.
Now, 1953, 3 years Borstal. 1956, 15 months imprisonment, escaped, recaptured, and sentenced to 5 years, and so on, and so on, and so on, right up to your last sentence is 1965, when you were sentenced to 10 years, of which you served 8, having earned partial remission for good conduct. To sum up, Mr. Healy, since you were a 9-year-old, would it be true to say that you've never been at liberty for more than a few months?
11 months was the longest, sir.
Mr. Healy, when was the first time you met the defendant, Commander Latcham?
1953, sir, when I got me Borstal. He done me for sus in the Bethnal Green Road.
Done me for sus?
The officer arrested me, sir, for being a suspected person loitering with intent to commit a felony, hanging about parked cars, more like. He was only aide to CID at that time, sir, but, oh dear me, was he mustard.
By mustard, I take it that you mean that Commander Latcham was very keen and efficient at his job.
Definitely, sir. He relished it, and he don't never seem to have lost the taste, neither.
And since it was Commander Latcham who arranged for your period of Borstal training in 1953, it is true that your paths have crossed on a number of occasions since, is it not?
Yes, sir, that is correct. He got me sent down in 1956. That was for HBI and EPBN.
Mr. Healy, please speak English. English that all of us can understand. The language of Shakespeare and Milton, you know.
Point taken, me lord. And as a matter of fact, I do know me Shakespeare like I know the back of me hand. I read him from cover to cover while I was in Parkhurst, Isle of Wight. They're keeping Iago in protective custody, are they? Well, I shall have one or two things to say about that scurvy knave when the proper moment arrives.
We are on the edge of our seat awaiting distribution of these pearls of scholarship. However, in the meantime, Mr. Healy, please explain HBI and EPBN.
House-breaking implements, HBI, and closed premises by night, EPBN. Simple, really, if you come to think it out, sir.
Mr. Healy, I'm certain that you intend no disrespect in this case, but you must appreciate it that you're not here to make light-hearted remarks.
What Mr. Manville is saying, Mr. Healy, is that I'm the only one who's allowed to make jokes in this court.
I'm sorry, my lord, it won't happen again.
Very well. Mr. Manville, please proceed.
Mr. Healy, let us return for a moment to your conviction in 1956.
Sir?
What were the housebreaking implements used in that case?
A pair of gloves and a torch, sir. It was pitch dark at the time and it was freezing cold at the time, but Mr. Latcham didn't think I ought to have such things as a pair of gloves or a torch, sir.
Yes, and what were the enclosed premises upon which you were found by night?
Scrap metal yard, sir, with a big corrugated iron fence round it.
And were you charged with stealing anything or attempting to steal anything?
No, sir.
And did you intend to steal anything?
No, sir, it was a junkyard. I was only poking around, sir.
So, you were in possession of a pair of gloves and a torch?
Yes, sir.
What sentence did you receive?
15 months.
And Commander Latcham, at that time, Detective Sergeant Latcham, was the officer in charge of the case?
Yes, sir. I'm more than happy with the result. He was too.
You have agreed that in 1965, you received a sentence of 10 years imprisonment?
Yes, sir. I was accessory to the Metropolitan Bank robbery at Bow, in charge of the bottles.
I'm in charge of the oxygen supply to the thermic lance equipment.
Yeah, something like that, sir. Yeah.
Now, the officer in charge of that investigation was the same Commander Latcham, at that time, Detective Chief Inspector Latcham.
Yes, sir, and I ain't got no complaints on that score, sir. We was banked to rights.
You were caught red-handed?
What we used to call a fair cop?
Exactly, sir, my lord.
And on that occasion, you made no attempt to resist arrest. You cooperated fully with the arresting officers, including Detective Chief Inspector Latcham, and you pleaded guilty at your trial at the Central Criminal Court.
Yes, sir. I was a good boy that time, weren't I?
Exactly. And your light sentence of 10
Light,
years?
you say? Can you think what it's like to get 10 years, sir?
Comparatively light sentence of 10 years may be attributed in part to the fact of your cooperative behaviour and in part to the fact that in this case, most of the money stolen from the bank was recovered.
Yeah, most of it was. We never had a chance to get our hands on it, did we? Yeah, most of it. All except for a little matter of 40 grand, which disappeared somewhere between the bank vaults and the police cars. But then what's £40,000 between friends? Now, you think he's a nice man, a gentleman, that Latcham, but I'm going to tell you something different. He's not content to knock you off, you know. He has to make it earn as well.
Mr. Healy, everyone in this court must be now fully aware of the fact that you are a man with a sense of grievance, possibly a deep sense of grievance. Nevertheless, it is important that you bear in mind exactly why you, indeed why we, are here. It is to try an action for malicious prosecution relating to a case which took place in 1974, not to make allegations which are quite unconnected with this action.
I'm sorry, sir, but I know everybody thinks that I'm black and he's white, but I'm telling you that between him and me, there's a very large area of grey, and they're the ones that have got to choose between us.
Mr. Healy. Now, you have told my lord and the jury that you were sentenced to 10 years for your part in the Metropolitan Bank robbery at Bow.
Yes, sir.
So with partial remission of sentence, you served something over 8 years.
Yes, sir.
And you were released from that sentence just over 3 years ago.
30 months, sir, almost to the day, yeah.
Those 8 years on the Isle of Wight had given you plenty of time to think.
Definitely, sir.
And as a result of this period of quiet thought and contemplation, well, did you find that your philosophy of life had changed in any way?
Well, yes, sir. I come to the conclusion that I was messing up my life. I spent more than half of it in jail. I'd had plenty of money, but I'd given that all to the bookmakers. The only friends I had were crooked people. And if you associate with crooked people, one thing leads to another.
I think we can grasp the point you're making, Mr. Healy.
So, I'd done 8 years. 8 years for nothing. It wasn't as if I was coming out with a pension or anything like that. I was coming out as skint as the day I went in, skint as the day I was born.
So, as a result of these reflections that we've been talking about, what did you decide?
I decided to turn it up, sir. Pack it in. Go straight.
And, as you've already told us...
Listen, Latcham, yes, I did. I met myself a nice, clean, straight girl, and I married her, sir. We've got a baby now, and she means the world to me.
I see. And as you've told us, you have been employed as a second-hand car salesman earning a modest but regular income.
Yeah, I was, till that Latcham came back into my life.
Mr. Healy, we are now coming to the most important part of your narrative. And it is important that, although you may feel strongly about certain events, you must keep a tight rein on your feelings and describe them to my lord and the jury in a calm and collected manner. Do I make myself clear?
Yeah, you do, sir.
So, Mr. Healy, will you tell us the circumstances leading up to the charge that you'd been involved in the Great Fulchester Bank job?
Well, it was like this, you know. After I got married to my wife, we decided that if the future was going to be any different to the past, if you know what I mean, we had to get out of the back streets, out of Bethnal Green, get out of London even, you know, start somewhere quite different. Her people had retired to this part of the country, so we wrote to them and they said we could move in with them. It was her father that put up the money for my car business, just not far from here, so just down the motorway.
And exactly when was that, Mr. Healy?
It was May, 2 years ago, sir.
May 1974, and the Great Fulchester Bank job took place in July.
It did, sir, but that weren't nothing to do with me.
As you have always contended.
On my baby's life, sir, may she never draw another
Mr.
breath.
Healy, the only oaths allowed in this court are those properly administered by the usher.
Now, at the time that you were living with your wife and your parents-in-law, what company did you keep?
Well, I didn't keep no company at all, sir. My wife was queer, see, 5 months gone, so I mostly stopped indoors with her.
And at that period of time, that's to say between May and July of 1974, did you ever meet or contact a man named Charles James Franks?
No, sir. Never met the man till we was all nicked.
Did you ever meet or contact a man named Joseph Ignatius Corrigan?
No, sir. I knew him when I'd done me 5, but I've never seen him since.
Did you ever meet or contact a man called Magnus Kennedy?
Mr. Manville, do I take it that the names you are putting to your client are the names of the men convicted of the so-called Great Fulchester Bank job?
Yes, my lord.
Very well, Mr. Healy. Did you meet or contact the man Magnus Kennedy?
I know the man, sir. He done his 10 with me in Parkhurst for the Metropolitan Bank job. But I didn't never see him till Latcham runs us in and we all met up again in the Fulchester Nick.
Just like a college Geordie.
College Goldie? What's that, sir?
Oh, dear me. It's a happy old boys' reunion, wouldn't you say, Mr. Elliot?
Mr. Healy, between May and July of 1974, did you ever meet or contact a man named Albert Charlton?
No, I did not. But I would like to say that if I met or contacted him here today, it would be to shake that lion squealer by the windpipe.
Mr. Healy, where were you at 11 o'clock on the morning of July 12th, 1974?
Well, it was pouring with rain, sir. So I decided not to go to work because you don't ever do any good in the car business if it's pouring down with rain. So I decided to drive the wife into Fulchester.
Why?
To choose a pram for our baby.
And did you drive your wife into Fulchester to choose a pram for the baby?
I did not, sir. When we got to that bit on the motorway where you turn off, it was stuck solid. I mean, you've never seen anything like it. Even then, it took us 4 hours to get home crawling along the verge.
And when did you first hear about the Great Fulchester Bank job?
That dinner time, sir, on the car radio.
Did you have anything to do with the planning or the execution of that robbery?
No, sir, on my baby's life.
Mr. Healy.
I'm sorry, sir.
So, when did you first become involved in the case?
August the 15th. I was minding my own business, fast asleep, in bed, when all of a sudden there was a thump, and bang, crash, wallop, it was off.
Sorry?
I mean to say there was Commander Latcham and other officers all ready to capture me.
What did you say?
I said, leave off, Gov, I ain't done nothing.
Did he reply?
Yes, sir. He said, I'm arresting you for the Fulchester bank job. I said, no, you're not, I wasn't there.
Did he say anything else?
Yeah. He said, I know that, but we need you to make up the numbers.
Did you say, who put the whisper on me, I'll kill the bastard?
Of course not, sir.
Are you certain?
Absolutely.
So he said that he knew you hadn't taken any part in the robbery, but that he needed you to make up the numbers.
Yes, sir. He said I'd been putting away stolen cars, and it was time I did another stretch, because I must have been up to something.
Did he charge you with stealing cars or attempting to steal cars?
No, sir, I hadn't done nothing like that. He had no evidence, no, sir.
But he charged you with the robbery?
Yeah. Yeah, I said, you got no evidence.
And he replied?
Yes, I have, he said. I've done a deal with Albert Charlton. He was there, and he's going to do the royalties on you.
He said, I've done a deal with Albert Charlton, he was there, and he's going to do the royalties on you?
That's right.
And did Charlton subsequently turn Queen's evidence and give damaging evidence against you in court?
Twice.
But the jury was not convinced of his evidence?
No, sir, they were not.
What happened to his co-accused, Messrs. Franks, Corrigan and Kennedy, was it?
They were all found guilty on the occasion of the second trial, my lord. The jury was out for 10 hours and returned a majority verdict.
Hardly what one would call an open and shut case, then.
No, sir, I'm the lucky one. My mates are doing 30 years apiece. 30 years on the evidence of that bugger Charlton set up by a rotten, stinking, crooked copper.
Mr. Healy, try and express yourself less colourfully.
Mr. Healy, will you please turn and face the jury?
I don't mind, sir.
I'll repeat your last answer so that each and every juror can appreciate the full significance.
I'm very sorry, sir. I don't remember exactly what I said.
Well, allow me to refresh your memory. I've made a note of everything you said.
Well, it's your job, isn't it, sir?
You're so right. It is my job. Let me read my note. No, sir, I'm the lucky one. My mates are doing 30 years apiece. Since when are these people your mates?
I'm sorry, sir. I don't quite follow the question.
The plaintiff is not alone in that, Mr. Elliot.
Well, it seems perfectly clear to me, my lord. These convicted criminals, whom Mr. Healy has sworn he hardly knew or did not know at all, since when are these people his mates?
I'm not very educated, you see, sir. Could he put it in a way that I could understand his drift, please?
All right, Mr. Healy. Let me put it this way. You've told my lord and the jury that you do not know the man called Charles James Franks.
Definitely, sir.
The man named Joseph Ignatius Corrigan, as you put it, I knew when I done my 5, but I never seen him since.
Correct, sir.
Magnus Kennedy, you have not seen since, and I use your own elegant phraseology, since he done his 10 with me in Parkhurst for the Metropolitan Bank job. Well, I take it he was your mate then, was he not? I mean, you were both convicted of the same crime.
Well, we wasn't particular mates, sir. I mean, we weren't drinking buddies or nothing like that. It was more a business relationship.
A business relationship that worked very well, did it not? A business relationship that may well be revived in the future.
How can you say it worked, sir, when we both got 10 years? I wouldn't go near him again. He's incompetent. You must be joking,
No,
sir.
I'm not joking. We come now to the man called Albert Charlton. Now, you have, Mr. Healy, uttered threats of violence towards this individual in this very court. Do you deny knowing him?
Of course I know the horrible so-and-so. And let me tell you something. If the only threats he had to worry about were the ones he heard in this court, he'd be laughing. He is not a very nice person, you know.
Well, nice person or not, he has been a close associate of yours over a number of years, has he not?
I've known him some time, yeah.
Oh, come, Mr. Healy, let's not be coy. You grew up together, did you not?
A lot of people come out of Bethnal Green, sir. Some good, some bad.
And you were in Borstal together, were you not?
That don't make us blood brothers, you know.
And you robbed the Metropolitan Bank in Bow together, did you not?
Yeah, we
Yes,
did.
yes,
and
we
I
did.
didn't like what I saw of him, neither. I am a technician, sir. I looked after the bottles. Unlike him, I have never carried a shooter in my life, sir, and I never will. He is a man of violence, a lunatic, what we call in my vernacular, a right animal.
Well, animal or not, you were happy to avail yourself of his brains and brawn on numerous occasions. I mean, Mr. Charlton has mentioned some 10 or 14 jobs in which you were involved together. Bank raids, breaking and entering, handling stolen cars. I mean, the list is endless.
Hey, this lies. It's all lies. Where's the evidence, eh? Why ain't I been charged then?
Really, my friend cannot bring in evidence of crimes, real or imaginary, of which my client has never been charged.
I disagree. But I have no need to argue the point. Mr. Albert Charlton has already admitted to being a member of the gang who robbed the Fulchester Bank.
Yeah, dirty horse, son. Halloween masks and submachine guns is about his mark.
Well, he's also sworn that you were present at that raid. Also in your Halloween mask, carrying your submachine gun. Now, what have you got to say about that?
I say the rotten, perjured bastard is lying.
Mr. Healy, you must keep a rein on your tongue.
I'm sorry, sir, but he is. He's lying. He lies every day for his living like other people go to work. 400 years jail sentences are being served at this moment on account of his lies. And him with a pension out of public funds, police protection, a Swiss bank account most likely, and all on the taxpayer too.
Oh, well, your concern for the taxpayer is touching. But we are not trying, Mr. Charlton. This is not a criminal case, Mr. Healy. And the poor man isn't even in this court to answer your allegations.
Lucky for him he isn't, because one day someone's just going to do their bleeding nut and jump on him.
What does that mean? Is that yet another threat? If there is malice in this case, it's quite clear the quarter from which it comes.
Mr. Healy, you must remember that the defendant in this case is not Mr. Charlton. Possibly we may have the privilege of hearing that gentleman's evidence
Worth a guinea a box.
at a later stage.
I do intend to call Mr. Charlton, my lord, after my client has given evidence.
Very well. We would all be well advised to reserve our comments on the quality of that gentleman's evidence until we have actually heard it. Mr. Healy, kindly take note. Mr. Elliot.
Oh, I've done with the plaintiff, my lord. I think the jury have seen and heard enough to know the type of man he is.
The type of man I am? What about that Albert Charlton, then? A horrible lying
Mr.
grass?
Healy, your feelings about him are quite beside the point. Will you please address yourself to the matter in hand, i.e. to the charge of malicious prosecution that you are bringing against Commander Latcham?
Yeah, he is the one I've got the dead needle for sitting right over there. Now, he's supposed to represent law and order, right? Society, as it were, right? Well, if law and order can only continue to exist by making use of creeps like Charlton, then roll on the revolution. And if coppers can only lay their hands on royalties for their evidence, they
Mr.
deserve to
Healy,
be dismissed
if you will
from
not
the
obey,
force.
I shall...
The cases in Fulchester are fictitious. Join us tomorrow when Healy versus Latcham will be resumed in the Crown Court. Yesterday, we heard how, after the great Fulchester bank job, one of the robbers turned Queen's evidence against his accomplices, with the result that 3 of them were convicted and each was sentenced to 30 years imprisonment. The fourth man, Terence Healy, the plaintiff in this action, steadily protested his innocence and was eventually acquitted. He now brings this action for malicious prosecution against the police officer in charge of the case, Commander Harry Latcham. The jury in this trial has been selected from members of the public whose names appeared on the electoral register and who are eligible for jury service. As the trial enters its second day, the plaintiff's wife, Mrs. Maureen Healy, is giving her evidence.
When that Latcham come for Terry, well, we was asleep at the time.
Now, this was on the 15th of August, 1974, was it not? Some 5 weeks after the occurrence, which we've all come to refer to as the Great Fulchester Bank job.
Yeah, that's right, sir. They took him away and it was over 22 months before we seen him home again.
And during this time, he was remanded in custody.
Well, yes, sir, they wouldn't never give him no bail, sir. We took it all the way to the High Court, to the judge in chambers, but it weren't no use.
Of course.
And he was definitely innocent, because he was with me.
Yes, as we all know, the proceedings against your husband ended with his acquittal.
Oh, yes, sir, but while he was away, we lost the business and he got made bankrupt.
Mrs. Healy, tell me this. If during the period when your husband was remanded in custody awaiting trial, you lost the business and he was made bankrupt, how does he then bring proceedings in this High Court for malicious prosecution, a form of action which is not eligible for legal aid?
Oh, well, his case was took up by the Civil Liberties, sir, on account of the wrong he suffered.
Oh, was it?
Mrs. Healy, during the period of 5 weeks which elapsed between the Great Fulchester Bank job, which, as we all know, took place on the 12th of July, and his arrest on the 15th of August, did you notice any change in your husband?
Any change, sir? How do you mean, sir?
Well, did he go to work at the usual time?
Yes, sir.
Did he come home as usual?
Yes, sir.
Did he seem to have any particular worries or anxieties?
No, sir.
Did he receive any odd telephone calls?
Oh, well, we haven't got a telephone, sir. I mean, not in the house, that is. He used to have one on his site in the up, but well, that's been cut off now.
Did he receive any strange visitors?
Well, no, sir, no. He was perfectly normal in every way, really. I mean, that was why I was so upset when that Commander Latcham come and kicked the door down.
Just a minute. He kicked the door down?
Oh, yes, sir, he kicked the door down.
Kicked?
Yes, sir, he kicked the door down and took him away.
Thank you, Mrs. Healy. You just wait there, please.
Mrs. Healy, how old are you?
30 next birthday, sir.
And how long did you say you've been married?
Just on 2 years, sir.
Now, obviously, you're a bright and an intelligent young woman.
Thank you, sir.
Tell me, Miss Healy, when you married your husband, you were aware that he was a man with a long criminal record, correct?
Oh, yeah, of course I've known, sir. I've known him 10 years, hadn't I?
10 years. The greater part of which, on his own admission, he spent in jail. And yet, you still married him.
Well, yes, sir. Well, I've been weighing him up and I knew there was good in him. We used to have a shop then in Bethnal Green, an off-licence, and Terry was one of the lads in the district. Well, he used to come in and out of the shop and I used to talk to him, you know.
That would have been in between jail sentences.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
In between jail sentences.
Uh-huh.
I thought then that one day I could get him off the district and straighten him out.
And what?
Straighten him out.
Oh, did you? Oh. Did you really believe that the leopard would change his spots?
Well, I don't know nothing about that, sir, but I knew Terry could change.
You must be among the world's optimists, Mrs. Healy.
What's so wrong with that, sir?
Nothing, nothing. So you married him and you moved up here to Fulchester in order to get him to, what should we call it, a better environment.
Well, yes, sir. I knew we might have difficulties on account of his past life, but I reckon we could make out.
Yet almost the first thing that happens when you come up here to Fulchester is that a number of men, at least 2 of them, well known to your husband, rob a Fulchester bank.
Well, no, how can you say it was the first thing, as though he come straight off the motorway and done the job? No, look, before all this happened, we got married, we found somewhere to live, we started a business, we started a baby, before all this happened.
Well, one does assume that it takes a considerable amount of time to set these things up.
Oh, well, I wouldn't know anything about that.
Mrs. Healy, you knew your husband was a man with a long criminal record.
Well, yeah, we've already been into all that. I mean, do we have to go into it all again?
Afraid so. So you knew and the police knew?
Yeah, of course they knew.
So obviously when a bank gets robbed here in Fulchester, the first thing the police will do is check out everyone living in the area with a record for similar offences.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Well, of course they must, Mrs. Healy, just as they would in any type of crime.
I'm sorry.
Oh, suppose that a number of assaults on children had taken place. Say your child. Now, the first thing the police would do would be to check and find out if anyone living in the area had a record for similar assaults. Whether anyone had been recently released from a mental hospital. That sort of thing. I'm right, am I not?
Well, you're right. Yes, you are.
Yes. And there would be nothing malicious in the police conducting such an investigation, now would there?
No, but this was different. That Latcham really had it in for Terry and everybody knew.
Mrs. Healy, that is a matter for this jury to decide. That's why we're here. Now, did you attend your husband's trials on charges relating to the Fulchester bank robbery here in this very building?
Well, yes, sir. Apart from a week off to have the baby, I was here every day for close on 2.5 months.
So you were then fully conversant with the evidence of Mr. Albert Charlton. You heard him give evidence and say on oath that your husband was, well, how did he put it? Fairly and squarely at the centre of the great Fulchester bank robbery. And did Charlton not say that your husband helped to set it up? That he was there with the others, wearing a Halloween mask, carrying a submachine gun, and later he shared in the proceeds? Your husband. Now, what have you got to say about that?
Well, Charlton weren't believed, were he? I said, how did Terry get off?
Well, it was, if I may put it this way, not an acquittal by the jury, but rather an acquittal on a technical point of...
No. My friend should know better than that. An acquittal is an acquittal. And a man is presumed innocent until proved guilty, and so convicted.
Mr. Manville is quite right, you know. Your question was misconceived. There does not exist a verdict of not proven or even half guilty in our system.
I beg your lordship's pardon. I will phrase my observation more precisely. Mrs. Healy, your husband was acquitted on the occasion of his third trial on the direction of the judge, the prosecution having offered no evidence against him, correct?
Yeah, that's right. By that time, they got it into their heads they couldn't never make it stick.
But your husband's co-defendants, Franks, Corrigan and Kennedy, were all convicted, and convicted on the evidence given by the man Charlton.
Worse luck for them.
Yeah, well, why should the jury have believed Charlton's evidence with regard to the three and reject it with regard to your husband?
Well, I can think of a very good reason, sir. I mean, maybe he was telling the truth about the other
He was
three.
telling the truth?
Well, I said maybe. I mean, I don't know. I mean, he was there and I
Healy,
wasn't.
but why, Mrs. Healy? I mean, why should he tell the truth about the three and lie about the fourth? I mean, we can't divide his evidence up into sections, can we?
Why not?
Really, Mr. Elliot, if you cannot forego these realms of speculation, I shall endeavour to bring us back to terra firma. Mrs. Healy, Albert Charlton originates from Bethnal Green, like you and your husband. Did you know him when you lived there?
Oh, we did know him, sir, but we wasn't particular friends or anything like that.
Can you think of any good reason why Albert Charlton should want to implicate in this grave crime a totally innocent man?
Oh, yes, my lord, the best reason in the world. Commander Latcham told him to.
Mrs. Healy, that is a very serious allegation. Have you any evidence to support it?
Well, I'm not stupid, am I? I mean, I can put two and two together. I mean, somebody must have put him up to telling all them lies, and it weren't the man in the moon.
Mr. Elliot.
Thank you, my lord. Mrs. Healy, would you lie to protect your husband?
I don't think it's fair to ask me that, sir.
I'm asking you that question, Mrs. Healy. Would you lie to protect your husband?
I might, sir.
Thank you. And where was your husband on the day of the robbery?
He was with me, like he said. With me.
Of course.
Commander Harry Latcham, my lord, New Scotland Yard.
Commander, in July 1974, were you in effective charge of the CID Department of the Fulchester City Police, then having the rank of Chief Superintendent?
I was, sir.
And you were responsible for arresting the 5 men who were subsequently charged with that robbery?
Yes, sir, I was.
Now, will you please describe to my lord and the members of the jury the circumstances surrounding those arrests?
May I refer to my notes, sir?
Oh, when were the notes made?
Immediately after the events described.
With your lordship's permission? Proceed, Commander.
Acting on information received on the 3rd of August 1974, I flew to the south of France in company with Detective Inspector Cheadle and Detective Sergeant Warlock, both of the Fulchester City Police. By arrangement, we met at Nice Airport, certain members of the Sûreté, and proceeded with these officers to the town of Cannes. There, on the terrace of the Carlton Hotel, I saw 4 men who were known to me as Charles James Franks, Joseph Ignatius Corrigan, Magnus Kennedy, and Albert Charlton.
What were they doing?
They were consuming a bottle of champagne, sir.
Only one bottle, Commander?
Well, half a dozen empties on the table, my lord, and 2 fresh bottles waiting in an ice bucket.
An idyllic scene. One wonders sometimes if one is not in the wrong profession. Please continue.
Detective Inspector Cheadle and I approached the table at which the 4 men were seated as discreetly as was possible. The terrace was extremely crowded at the time. I introduced myself and was about to introduce Detective Inspector Cheadle when Charlton said, "Oh my God, it's the filth," and attempted to leave the terrace. After a short struggle, the men were overpowered with the help of the Sûreté and placed under arrest. Later that day, in the office of the Sûreté in Cannes, I told the men that I would be arresting them and charging them with robbing the bank in Fulchester and stealing £2 million in cash and a quantity of safe deposit boxes. They made no reply. The following day, I accompanied the men by air to London.
The following day, Commander? Was all this accomplished within the normal extradition procedures?
Oh, yes, my lord. The men volunteered to return.
They volunteered?
Yes, my lord, after conversations with myself and the Sûreté.
Very well, proceed.
We then travelled to Fulchester by car, where at 11:22 p.m. the men were charged, cautioned, and made no reply. Acting on further information received on August the 15th, in company with other officers, I proceeded to an address in the village of North Sain, near Fulchester. There I saw a man I knew to be Terence Healy. I told him that I was arresting him for his part in the robbery at Fulchester on July the 12th. I cautioned him, and he replied, "Who put the whisper on me? I'll kill the bastard." He was taken to Fulchester police station, where he was formally charged, cautioned, and made no reply. Subsequently, Healy gave notice of alibi, as is required by law, but no independent witness could be found either to substantiate or to refute his claim that at the time of the robbery he was trapped in a traffic jam outside Fulchester. That is my evidence, my lord.
We come now, Commander, to today's proceedings in this case. Proceedings in which you ironically appear as the defendant.
Yes, my lord.
Commander Latcham, this is an important question. Have you any feelings of personal malice towards the plaintiff, Mr. Terence Healy?
No, sir.
Have you ever gone out of your way to do him harm?
No, sir. Oh, I've done him a bit of harm from time to time in my duty as a police officer, but there was never anything personal in it.
Now, Commander Latcham, why did you arrest Mr. Healy in the manner in which you have described?
Because I had reason to believe that he had taken part in that robbery. Very good reason.
Very good reason. Commander, at this point we have to tread very carefully so as to observe the rules of evidence.
Yes, sir.
Will you please answer this question either yes or no? On August the 6th, did you have a conversation with Albert Charlton?
Yes, sir.
Now, at whose suggestion did this conversation take place?
At Albert Charlton's suggestion, sir.
On August the 7th, did you have another conversation with Albert Charlton?
Yes, sir.
And as a result of that conversation, did he make a statement in writing which he signed?
Yes, sir.
Is this that statement? Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Later that same day, did you see Charlton again?
Yes, sir.
And did a further conversation take place?
Yes, sir.
And as a result of that conversation, did Charlton make a second statement in writing, which he also signed?
Yes, sir.
And is this that statement? Thank you.
Yes, sir, it is.
My Lord, may both these statements be entered as an exhibit in this case?
As tending to show good faith on the part of your client?
Precisely, my Lord.
Very well.
Commander Latcham, did you believe that the contents of those statements, did you believe the contents to be true?
I kept an open mind on that, sir. But I knew that it was vitally necessary to follow up and to investigate what Charlton had said.
And presumably that is what you did.
Yes, sir.
As a result of that second statement, did you on August the 15th arrest Mr. Healy?
Yes, sir. As a result of that second statement.
Thank you very much, Commander.
Commander Latcham, Albert Charlton was the very cornerstone of your case against Terence Healy, was it not?
Yes, sir.
Without the evidence of Albert Charlton, you could never have got the case off the ground.
No, sir.
No one at the scene of the crime identified the robbers.
No, sir, they wore masks.
There were no fingerprints.
The robbers wore gloves.
No part of the proceeds were traced back to any one of them.
No, sir, the proceeds have still to be recovered.
There was no circumstantial evidence of any sort linking any one of these men with the robbery.
There was Healy's move to Fulchester just before the raid, sir.
There were no oral admissions or written confessions made by any of the accused men.
I beg to disagree, sir. At the time I arrested him, Healy said... "Who put the whisper on me? I'll kill the bastard."
And in your opinion, that is an oral admission?
That statement implies only one thing to me, sir. Guilty knowledge on Healy's part.
Oh, Healy emphatically denies having said any such thing.
I know, sir, but he's in a habit of denying things. It's almost second nature to him.
Healy said, "Leave off, Gov, I ain't done nothing."
No, sir, nothing like that.
You then said, "I'm arresting you for the Fulchester bank job," to which he replied, "No, you're not. I wasn't there."
No, sir.
Will you please listen carefully, Commander Latcham, as this is of vital importance.
I have heard it all already, sir, in court 3 times. I almost know it by heart. It doesn't make it any truer.
You said, "I know that, but we need you to make up the numbers."
Rubbish.
Healy then said, "You've got no evidence," to which you replied, "Yes, I have.
Sir.
I've done a deal with Albert Charlton.
Sir.
He was there, and he's going to do the royalties on you."
Sir! That whole conversation is fabricated. There is no question my making a mistake about it. I made a careful note of what Healy said at the time because I realized it would be of great importance. Healy said, "Who put the whisper on me? I'll kill the bastard."
Now that is a matter for the jury to decide.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Now let us return to Albert Charlton, who you have agreed was the cornerstone of your case.
Yes, sir.
Albert Charlton, a self-confessed participant in the crime.
Yes, sir.
As a matter of interest, Commander Latcham, what happened to Mr. Charlton? You have told us that you arrested him and subsequently he was charged with robbery. If he didn't stand trial with the others, what did happen?
Well, he was brought up in court shortly before the others were tried for the first time, my lord. He pleaded not guilty, prosecution offered no evidence, and on the judge's direction, the jury acquitted him.
And then, only then, you were free to use him as your star witness against the others.
Yes, sir.
How did you come to the decision to proceed in this way?
Well, that wasn't my decision, my lord. I don't have the power to make that sort of decision.
Then who did, in fact, decide the matter?
Well, the matter was the subject of negotiations which lasted for several weeks, my lord, between Charlton, his solicitor, and Mr. Matthew Noon of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions.
Were you present at these negotiations?
No, my lord.
Obviously, some settlement was reached between the parties. Do you know, does anyone, apart from the parties themselves, know the terms of that settlement?
I'm afraid I don't know the exact details, my lord. All I do know is that Charlton was given an amnesty for his part in the robbery, coupled with police protection for so long as he should need it, in return for information relating to that and to other crimes.
I confess I find the matter troublesome, to say the least. There must be a better way to serve the blind goddess, to ensure that justice is done.
Well, I hope I don't speak out of place, my lord, but we regard this as something of a breakthrough. Cases like this are a new development. For the first time, the professional criminal is trying to cooperate with the police.
What you're saying, Commander Latcham, is that the squealer is a necessary evil.
I'd go further than that and say that society is positively indebted to men like Bertie Small, Marney, Lowe, Charlton himself. Without these men, the forces of evil would have it all their own way.
And what if the innocent suffer?
Thankfully, my lord, that is not my department.
I'm sorry, Mr. Manville. I really mustn't take over your job. Please continue.
I'm obliged to your lordship for your lordship's assistance. Commander Latcham, have you ever come across an informant who did not act from reasons of self-interest?
I don't think I have, sir. In fact, I'm sure I haven't.
Self-interest involving either the hope of financial reward, freedom from prosecution, the license to operate some shady racket?
Well, it's usually something of that sort, sir.
Would you not agree that such information is often tainted, often unreliable, sometimes downright lies?
Obviously, sir, any information with a background of self-interest has to be looked at very carefully. But the police and the courts, I believe, have rules governing that procedure. And having said that, let me also say, sir, that it's highly unlikely that an informant would lie to us. It's just not in the interests of a good snout.
Ah, you use the expression good snout. I presume you would hope to keep such a valuable contact for a number of years.
Yes, sir.
And you must agree that it must be in the nature of such a beast to operate within, or at least on the fringes of the underworld.
Well, that stands to reason, sir. One's not likely to get valuable information from the local vicar.
Exactly. You are relying for your information on people drawn from the most degraded section of society. From that section least devoted to the pursuit of truth.
I wouldn't know about that, sir. I'm not a sociologist.
Nevertheless, sociologist or not, you are familiar, I am sure, with the old maxim, it is far better that 99 guilty should go free than that one person innocent should be wrongly convicted.
I'm sorry, sir. I regard that maxim as superseded. It was written before the advent of the professional criminal. I'm only interested in preventing crime.
And if the odd innocent should happen to pick up 30 years from time to time, what would you say to that?
I would regard that, sir, as a great pity. We do our best to avoid it. Unfortunately, it is bound to happen from time to time. Having said that, sir, let me say that I personally am quite sure that Healy is not one of those innocent.
What? When 3 separate trials by jury have failed to establish his guilt?
Yes, sir.
The cases in Fulchester are fictitious. Join us tomorrow when Healy versus Latcham will be concluded in the Crown Court. Yesterday, we heard how, following the arrest of 4 men for the great Fulchester bank job, one of them, a man called Albert Charlton, was guaranteed immunity from prosecution in return for giving evidence against his accomplices in this and other cases. One of the men against whom Charlton gave evidence, Terence Healy, was finally acquitted of the bank robbery. Mr. Healy is now bringing an action for malicious prosecution against the police officer in charge of the case, Commander Harry Latcham. The jury in this trial has been selected from members of the public, whose names appear on the electoral register and who are eligible for jury service. As today's proceedings open in the Crown Court, Commander Latcham is still undergoing cross-examination.
No, my lord.
Commander Latcham, shortly before the court rose yesterday afternoon, you said something that has caused me concern during the adjournment. I made a careful note at the time, which I will now read. Mr. Manville's question to you read as follows. Nevertheless, sociologist or not, you are familiar, I am sure, with the old maxim. It is far better that 99 guilty should go free than that one person innocent should be wrongly convicted. To which you, Commander Latcham, replied, I am sorry, sir, I regard that maxim as superseded. It was written before the advent of the professional criminal. I am only interested in preventing crime. Do you still abide by that answer?
Yes, my lord, I do.
In other words, you're saying that in certain cases, the end, public safety, one assumes, justifies the means, the granting of amnesty to dangerous criminals.
I am, my lord.
You are aware that a Lord Justice of Appeal has called these means repulsive and expressed the wish that they should never be used again?
Yes, my lord, I am familiar with the judgment delivered by Lord Justice Wynne. My only comment on that is, if only the Lord Justice could swap jobs with me for 1 week, he'd get a better understanding of the problems that face us.
It might indeed be a fruitful experience for both of you.
May I just say this, my lord? There is one maxim that I have constantly in my mind, a maxim of the late President Truman.
Yes.
If you can't stand the heat, stay out of the kitchen.
Ah, that one.
My lord, I interpret that maxim in this way, that those who choose to operate on the outskirts of the underworld, no, I go further than that and say that those who choose to keep bad company have no right to complain when the net cast to catch the big fish hauls them ashore too.
Sometimes, Commander Latcham, you sound like the last of the Victorians. And I do not say that in any pejorative sense. Mr. Manville.
Commander Latcham, you have told the court that you took no part in the negotiations between Charlton and Mr. Matthew Noon of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions.
That is correct, sir.
But presumably you were able to point out to Mr. Noon the size and the quality of the fish that you had caught.
I was, sir.
Did you point out to Mr. Noon that Charlton was a man of violence? He has been variously described as a hitman, heavy, a man with a long criminal record.
I did, sir.
A man whom, in the ordinary sense, you would have been only too eager to have put behind bars.
Certainly, sir.
And did you point out to Mr. Noon that if you were to do a deal with such a man, the Director of Public Prosecutions must be certain of getting the best of the bargain?
I left Mr. Noon to draw that conclusion for himself, sir. I regard it as no part of my duty to point out that which is obvious. Quite apart from that, sir, as you well know, the DPP very rarely becomes involved in negotiations of that kind, particularly since the recent criticisms made in the Court of Appeal. The DPP is bound to take the matter very seriously.
Yes, would you agree that no one would have agreed to have done business with Charlton on a one-to-one basis? Or, if one may put it another way, on a straightforward Judas Iscariot arrangement?
Well, obviously not, sir. We were interested in a number of names. Names of villains of the type that Sir Robert Mark has called target criminals. Men who are at the top of their profession.
What, 20 names? 30? 40 names? Whole gang?
I can't give an exact number, sir, or a precise description. We were interested in breaking up something that was less closely knit than a gang, in the old sense like the Cray brothers or the Richardsons.
And what then were you seeking to destroy?
An informal association, sir, of criminals of a highly professional nature who would come together from time to time for a specific purpose. For example, to execute a particular wages snatch or to rob a particular bank. Then they would go their separate ways until the next time. Now, we knew that something like this was happening regularly in the Northeast and in the Midlands, and we were determined to stamp it out.
I'm obliged to say that I find this concept of going after target criminals a little difficult to accept.
Yes, my lord?
You first find your criminal and then find the crime he has committed, what we used to call a holding charge.
Yes, my lord. But perhaps I should emphasize that Sir Robert Mark was speaking of the professional criminal, men whose names were well known to us.
An example of this would have been prosecuting Al Capone for falsifying his tax returns.
Exactly, my lord. That prosecution did more to clear up serious crime in Chicago in the 1930s than rounding up 100 of Capone's associates would have done.
But you will admit, Commander Latcham, that the method has its own inherent dangers, the most obvious being the temptation to bend the evidence a bit.
I don't think so, my lord. The target criminal is the concern of senior and experienced officers.
Oh, I'm afraid, Commander Latcham, that seniority alone is no guarantee of integrity.
No, my lord. But we feel the public interest is best served by using this method.
The public good is the highest law.
Yes, my lord, that sums up my philosophy admirably.
I sometimes wish that members of the police force would stick to policing and leave philosophy to the philosophers. Well, Mr. Manville, let us return to Albert Charlton.
Commander Latcham, did you suggest names to Charlton, or did he put names to you?
It's a bit of both, sir. General horse trading in both directions.
In the case of Mr. Healy, did you suggest the name to Charlton, or did he put the name to you?
Healy was one of the names that I put to Charlton.
Why?
Because I knew Healy of old. He's a persistent thief, a recidivist, a man who in the past has operated as part of such an organization as those I've described.
It seems to me extraordinary that in a situation where a criminal has offered you names in exchange for an amnesty from prosecution, that you suddenly reverse the process and offer him names.
That was only for confirmation, sir.
Confirmation of what?
Of my suspicions.
That Healy was on the Fulchester job.
Exactly, sir.
But weren't you surprised that if Healy was on that raid, Charlton hadn't given you his name in the first statement?
They were old friends, sir. Borstal, Parkhurst.
Well, you had many more old friends. Why did you pick on Healy?
Healy is a Londoner, sir. I hoped that Charlton could tell me why he'd come up to Fulchester.
Did you happen to know that he'd married a local girl and come to stay with his parents-in-law?
All I knew, sir, was that he'd married a girl from the Bethnal Green Road and had come to Fulchester to share in the action.
And it never occurred to you to give him the benefit of the doubt?
Not Healy, sir. That leopard will never change his spots.
Thank you, Commander Latcham.
Having listened to my learned friend on his various fishing expeditions, I feel it imperative to bring us back to the issue, and that issue is malicious prosecution. Now, Commander, on what basis did you charge Mr. Healy with bank robbery?
On the basis of Albert Charlton's statement.
And did you believe that statement to be true?
I kept an open mind about it. I knew that was a matter for the jury to decide.
Thank you very much, Commander. Unless your lordship has any further questions. I would like to call Mr. Albert Charlton, please.
Albert Charlton, please.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Your name is Albert Charlton?
It is.
Mr. Charlton, will you please look at this piece of paper? Now, is that the address where you are at present residing?
It is.
Now, on the 14th of May this year, did you appear at this Crown Court on an indictment relating to the robbery with violence of the Bank of Fulchester?
I did.
And did you plead not guilty to that indictment?
I did.
And did the prosecution offer no evidence against you, and were you acquitted upon the direction of the judge?
That's right.
Now, did you subsequently give evidence at the trial relating 4 men to that robbery, Franks, Corrigan, Kennedy, and Healy, as evidence for the prosecution?
I did.
Mr. Charlton, were you in fact present at that bank robbery?
I was there, and I've said so often enough.
So you admit to being there. Now, who else was there?
The names you've mentioned: Franks, Corrigan, Kennedy, and Healy.
Oh, no, he weren't.
Mrs.
Oh,
Healy.
yeah, he were, missus. He was there.
Silence!
And I'll tell you something.
Miles, you better deal with it.
He was the worst of us. He always is. He's a right sadistic little bastard. What we used to call a right animal.
Thank you.
Mr. Charlton, at the time of your arrest for the Great Fulchester Bank job, you were a wanted man.
I believe there was a couple of warrants out.
What do you mean you believe there were a couple of warrants out? There were warrants issued at Fulchester, Liverpool, Manchester, Bow Street, London, relating to no fewer than 38 crimes of violence to which you have since confessed.
I know he didn't tell me. I don't know.
Identikit pictures that appeared in every newspaper with a national circulation. Your photograph was prominently displayed in every police station in the United Kingdom, and you still say you didn't know?
No. When I have freedom of choice, I don't spend time poking around different nicks looking for pictures of myself. Now do I?
Well, why is it, then, that on the 3rd of March, 1974, the day the Liverpool warrant was issued, you left your lodgings in Prince's Park, leaving behind your clothes and other personal belongings, even a quantity of cash?
I don't happen to like living in Liverpool. I got fed up. I'm a bachelor, and I can live where I please.
Well, you'd paid the rent. You'd left behind 3 extremely expensive pigskin coats, made to your measurement.
I fail to see the relevance of this. Look, do me a favour now. Pull him up.
Mr. Charlton, if you think you can be familiar with me, you'll find you are mistaken. Please continue.
I'm obliged to your lordship. At any rate, when you were arrested by Commander Latcham in the south of France, you already had plenty on your conscience.
I wonder whether conscience is an appropriate word to use.
Yes, my lord, the thought did cross my mind at the moment I uttered the word. Let me rephrase the question, Mr. Charlton. When you were apprehended by Commander Latcham on the terrace of the Carlton Hotel, you knew you were in plenty of trouble.
Well, I reckon that anybody who gets captured by Commander Latcham is in plenty of trouble. He's known as a hard man.
Ah. He is known as a hard man, is he? By whom is he known as a hard man?
Well, by crooked people. I don't suppose he knows anybody else. I mean to say, it's in the nature of his job, isn't it? He's a good copper.
No, you mean a very effective copper. Catches a lot of criminals.
Something like that.
Now, in evidence yesterday, Commander Latcham told us that the first suggestion that you might turn Queen's evidence came from you.
I reckon that if I didn't, one of the others would. It happens all the time.
No honour among thieves, apparently.
No, I ain't never come across none of that.
What's yours is mine, and
what's mine is
own.
my own, yeah. That's about it.
And in what form did you make your first approach to Commander Latcham?
I sent for him, didn't I? Sent for him to come and see me in my Peter.
Peter?
In my cell. And then I offered to do the royalties for him on the Fulchester bank job.
And what was his reaction to that?
He says, I don't need you. I got more than enough on the 4 of you as it is.
On the 4 of you?
Yeah, there were 4 of us.
No mention of Terence Healy?
No. Well, that was to come later. So off he went, till I sent for him again.
And on this second occasion?
I said, well, what if I name you some names, Gov, clear up all the crime in your manor? And he said, fair enough, here's a paper and pencil, but don't you give me no effing rubbish. So I sat down and wrote him some names and dates and places. By and by he comes back and he says, that's more like it, my son. You keep on writing.
And what about his part of the agreement? You weren't doing all this on spec, as it were you?
Well, I'm just coming to that, and I said, I've given you all these, and I'll give evidence in court for you on all of them. But I want you to give me a guarantee in writing that I don't get no bird for none of it. I want police protection for the rest of me natural. And a pension.
Pension? What did he say to this?
He says, son, I can't guarantee you nothing, but you give me 5 more names and I'll slip your brief in.
Your solicitor?
That's right, into Mr. Noon at the DPP's office, and he'll fix you up.
5 more names. What names?
Well, I guess you're only interested in one. Terence Healy.
So, among others, you gave Latcham Healy's name.
That's right.
Yes? And this was the first time that Terence Healy was mentioned?
That's right.
Who suggested Healy's name first, you or Latcham?
I don't remember.
Well, I put it to you that it was Commander Latcham.
Well, it's possible.
No, it's more than possible. It's definite. In that Commander Latcham has already testified in this court that he was the one that put the names to you.
That's That's your answer then, isn't it?
Exactly. Now, I also put it to you that you didn't name Healy in that first statement because Healy wasn't ever there.
Oh, he was there, all right, standing right beside me.
You're lying, Charlton.
Oh, sir, I'm not.
You've made up this whole story to save your own skin.
He was there.
Mr. Charlton, let's go through it all again. You made two statements.
That's right.
The first made no mention of Healy.
That's right.
Only in the second was his name mentioned.
That's right.
Now, why was that?
Because I owed him a favour.
A favour? You owed him a favour? And what was the nature of this favour?
It was a personal favour of a domestic nature.
Oh, I see. You owed him a personal favour of a domestic nature. And yet, on Commander Latcham's suggestion, you named him in the second statement. Why?
Because I had to be honest, didn't I? Come clean.
Oh, so much for your sense of honour, for your sense of loyalty. I suggest that Terence Healy would never have been named at all if Commander Latcham had been satisfied with the names you offered in your first statement, and if he had been willing, at that time, to deliver his side of the bargain.
That's right. Healy would have got clean away with it.
Can you give me one good reason for throwing in Terence Healy's name at the last minute as a make-weight?
Well, I'm not saying I like
So you don't deny that Healy was in fact a make-weight, then?
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, I thought the man deserved a break. And he'd shown more sense than the rest of us. There we was knocking back our share in the south of France, having a good time, while he was back home in Fulchester, turning his money over. You'd think he'd been listening to Mrs. Thatcher.
No, your political observations don't answer the question, do they, Mr. Charlton? Why was Healy thrown in at the last minute?
Well, it's obvious, isn't it?
No.
Well, it was either him or me.
You or him doing what?
Use your loaf, Gov. Him or me doing 25 year.
So, Terence Healy was never on the Fulchester Bank job at all, was he, Mr. Charlton?
Yeah, he was. I was standing right next to him, weren't I? I mean, why should I tell a lie?
Well, I can think of three excellent reasons. The amnesty, police protection, and your pension.
Look, I've sworn I'm telling the truth and I'm sticking by what I've said. I don't know why you go on about it. Healy's choked because he didn't think of it first. Right, Terry? Yeah. Well, that's me evidence. Okay?
It is for you, members of the jury, to decide on the facts, and for me, as judge, to direct you on the law. My task, accordingly, is to explain and define the action of malicious prosecution and to indicate to you the areas of your concern. To succeed in such an action, the plaintiff, that is, Mr. Terence Healy, must prove, 1, that the defendant instituted or carried on proceedings maliciously. You must decide whether Commander Latcham launched and pursued proceedings against Mr. Healy out of malice or from devotion to duty. 2, the plaintiff must show the absence of reasonable or probable cause for such proceedings, and we are concerned only with one crime, the robbery at the bank at Fulchester. Should Commander Latcham have acted on the statements of Mr. Charlton? Were they worthy of credence at all? Did the inducements offered to Charlton, freedom from prosecution, police protection, and so on, render those statements worthless? Did Commander Latcham act in good faith? That is the nub of the matter. Or did he act from cynicism and a desire to clear the books? Members of the jury, it is a matter for you. 3, the final requirement is that the plaintiff has suffered damage. This can hardly be in dispute. Mr. Healy spent 22 months in jail before he was finally acquitted, and during that time his business went to rack and ruin and he was made bankrupt. If you decide that Mr. Healy has satisfied you on heads 1 and 2, then you will go on to this third head and decide what sum in damages can compensate him for those 22 months in prison and the ensuing loss. Members of the jury, please retire, select a foreman, and consider your verdict.
Will the foreman please stand? Now just answer the question, yes or no. Have you reached a verdict on which you are all agreed?
Yes.
Do you find for the plaintiff, Terence Healy, or for the defendant, Commander Latcham?
For the plaintiff.
Have you agreed upon a sum of damages?
Yes.
What is that sum?
£7,500.
Thank you. Please sit down.
Very well. There will be judgment for the plaintiff in the sum of £7,500 with costs. Members of the jury, I wish to thank you very much for your assistance in this matter. Juries are of very special importance in cases of this sort, where it is alleged that officers of the law have misconducted themselves. It is highly desirable that these cases are reserved for juries and not decided by judges as a matter of principle, in order to protect civil liberties from oppression by any manifestation of the authority of the state. Thank you very much.
All stand.